Hey, everybody. So this stream is going to be about Pascal's wager, and I already know what you're thinking. First of all, you should believe in God. Bottom line, nobody should get through their life thinking God doesn't exist, or at least not acting as if God exists. So there already are some objections that I can anticipate there are going to be in the comments, and you're here first. You're going to hear these first. Watch them. Watch in the chat replay. When you watch this video later, they're all going to be in the objections in the chat. It's going to be things like, well, which God? Which God? There's multiple gods. So the many God objections, I'll handle that. What about, well, there's just no evidence. We can't believe in God if there's no evidence. And after all, Pascal's wager is very irrational. It's a fideistic argument. So how can I believe in something without any evidence? I'm going to deal with that objection later as well. Finally, you might also hear something like, well, I want to believe it. I just can't force myself to believe. Maybe you've tried this throughout your life. You're like, I want it to be true. I've tried so long. First of all, I have a video on that. Go look at, why doesn't God, it's something titled like, why doesn't God just make himself appear? Something like that. And I will handle that objection in this video as well. So without further ado, let me start actually by looking at a brief bio of Pascal. He was a man of reason, which is weird because history shows him to us to be a man of faith. But Pascal was really, really brilliant. He was a child prodigy. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, he was a genius. So first of all, he died very young at age 39. He had an illness that he went through throughout all of his life. And, they even had an autopsy after his death. People don't really know what exactly he had. He did at one point have a brain lesion, so that could have contributed to his death. Maybe some have speculated it could be tuberculosis, but he was ill throughout his whole life. He died at age 39. One thing you should know, that he was educated. He was homeschooled. So here's for all you people who are homeschooled. It's possible that you can be really brilliant and be homeschooled, but he had no formal education whatsoever. He also never held a formal academic position in any university under any discipline whatsoever, whether it be philosophy, for which he's remembered, or mathematics or physics, which he contributed greatly. Actually, he wrote a book that would be used in primary schools all around France for several decades, if not hundreds of years later, as like the beginning elementary textbook on geometry. So like I said, he was a child prodigy. He was educated, homeschooled by his father. His mother died when he was very young. His father was a noble, so that could have contributed to why, of course, he never had to get an academic position. He just kind of lived off his father's inheritance after a while. Although I forget what year his father died. I was thinking it's around his 20s or 30s Pascal only lived to 39, so he was relatively young that his father died. But as he was young, his father was a noble. He home educated him, but his father also he was a bit of an amateur mathematician. He was a tax collector and a local judge in France, in Rouen, France. And Etienne was his father's name. Etienne never remarried after his wife passed away, Blaise Pascal's mother. So he decided he would educate his children. The young Blaise Pascal showed an extraordinary intellectual ability with an amazing aptitude for mathematics and science. I mean, this kid, first of all, his father tried to keep him away from mathematics. I don't know why, but by the age of 12, Pascal, the younger one, had rediscovered on his own, using charcoal on a tile floor, Euclid's first 32 geometric propositions at age 12, guys. And so Etienne conceded, and he's like, okay, you can have a copy of Euclid's Elements and Euclid's Geometry. So, but just a quick rundown of like Pascal's life. At age 16, he wrote a significant treatise on the subject of projective geometry, a field he invented, and conic sections. At age 19, he invented the mechanical calculator. He is considered one of the first of two inventors of the mechanical calculators. You have him to thank for that. You're welcome. All those little calculator apps and all your math throughout high school and junior high and college. Thank you, Pascal. Like I said, he was a mathematician, but he also made by age 24, he made important contributions in physics with respect to the study of fluids. He clarified the concepts of pressure and vacuum. He corresponded with and helped to generalize the work of Evangelista Torricelli. Pascal also wrote in defense of the scientific method. So now we're in his 20s, but at age 31, Pascal corresponded with Pierre de Fermat, is a Fermat or Fermat, depending on how you want to pronounce that. But he's known as very, very famous mathematician, and he corresponded with him on probability theory. Which strongly influenced the fields of modern economics and social sciences, and that collaboration with Fermat helped to lay the important groundwork for Leibniz to come later and invent calculus. So, and then if that wasn't enough, by age 38, right before he died, age 39, Pascal invented a form of public transportation, y'all, in the 1660s. So Paris actually established this, initiated it, and made it. It was like drawn by rails and horses and so on, horse-drawn. But he's known as the father of public transportation as well. So he's got other mathematical ideas named after him, like the Pascal's triangle and so on. But I mention all this because he was not a slouch when it came to reason, when it came to mathematics, and when it came to probability in particular, which is what you'll see in Pascal's wager. It's actually a probability decision matrix. So, but that was a quick rundown of his life, with respect to mathematics, science, and so on. But let me now plug in the things with his religious life, because although I'm separating these need to be seen as interwoven. Okay, so in 19, all right? It's really funny to me, by the way, when I have students and my own son talk to me about the 1900s, right? I was born in, the 1900s, and I was born in the 20th century, and they'll refer to like that last century. It's really funny, but we're not referring to that one right now. We're talking about the 1646 in particular. Pascal had, so he would have been in his 20s, about 23 at this time. He had what most people refer to as a first conversion, but he quickly fell away from this into like a worldly period, which lasted, I don't know, about 8 years or so, where he just didn't really take his faith seriously. And so this wasn't until 1655 that he underwent a deepening of conversion. And what a way to do it. He underwent an intense religious experience. I love it. First of all, thank you in the chat. I have a chatter here that I've never seen you before, but welcome, named Pascal. I love that, first of all. I love that. Welcome. And I had to point it out. Normally I wouldn't point out, like, but that is, what are the odds? Maybe you're here because you like, oh, I have something ringing in my ear as somebody's talking about me. All right. So, but I said in 1655, so it would have been in his early 30s. He had a intense religious experience, what some people call, I think he described it himself as a night of fire. For about 2 full hours, he just had, I'll read it to you, actually. I think this is worth reading to you, and I'll put it up on the screen as well. This is incredible. So right here, he describes it like this. He said, the year of grace, 1654, Monday, 23rd November, Feast of St. Clement. This is really interesting also because the calendar we now use today, of course, is just Thursday, Memorial Day, I don't know, Monday, Martin Luther King Day, President's Day, whatever it may be, Thanksgiving, but he's putting it on the liturgical calendar. He said, Feast of St. Clement the Martyr and others in the Martyrology, Vigil of St. Chrysogenus, that would have been the very next day, the 24th, Martyr and others, from about 10:30 at night until about 10:30 midnight. Fire. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and the sages. Mind you, he undergoes this mystical experience while not being deeply, devoutly religious. It just happens. Certitude, feeling joy, peace. God of Jesus Christ, my God and your God will be my God. There he's referencing a phrase from the scriptures. Forgetfulness of the world and of everything except God. He's only found by the ways taught in the gospel. Grandeur of the human soul, righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you. Joy, 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 tears of joy. I've never had a religious experience. Little confession time. So I don't know what it's like. Maybe someday, maybe fingers crossed, because this happened, later in his life here. So I don't know what it's like. I've departed from him. They have forsaken me, the fount of living water. My God, will you leave me? Let me not be separated from him forever. This is eternal life, that they know you, the one true God, and that the one you sent, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. I left him. I fled him, renounced, crucified. Let me never be separated from him. He's only kept securely by the ways taught in the gospel. Renunciation, total and sweet, complete submission to Jesus Christ and to my director, his spiritual director. Eternally enjoy for a day's exercise on the earth, not to forget your words. Amen. So this right here is, let me pull this back up. That I just read to you, this was found on a piece of paper by chance, just accidentally, by somebody attending to his death or something. It was sewn into the lining of his jacket. And it was said that many jackets that they found would also have pockets like that, with stitching indicating that, well, he had sewn it into the lining of other jackets as well, the same paper. So anytime, we put on different clothes all the time, but we were talking about jackets, depending on the weather, depending on, where he was going, the occasion and so on. He would put on a different jacket for a different season, I suppose, or a different occasion. And he would then sew in that, what he calls, what commentators call I had it up here, the memorial. So he wrote this briefly after, and then and he sews it into the line of his jacket. Yeah. All right. So again, all that to say, he had this intense religious experience, and from then on, he immediately begins writing his first major literary work on religion, called the Provincial Letters. Now, this he did this during a several year period, and he did this also while almost completely abandoning like the normal life. He led this ascetic life. And T.S. Eliot, who is a very famous poet and author himself, he describes Pascal as a man of the world among ascetics, and an ascetic among men of the world. I'll say that again. A man of the world among ascetics, and an ascetic among men of the world. So he was living kind of this double life. For about a 4-year period, he would travel regularly between his home in Paris and then I think it was Port Royal, which was a convent. So which actually his sister lived in. So and he was there just for the solitude and for the silence and so on. So he became a very, very cloistered, almost semi-cloistered, deeply religious person at this time. Now, you might think, whoa, gosh, what a waste. A skeptic would, somebody who's atheist. And if I weren't religious, I would be like, what a waste of a mind. Gosh, he just goes off the deep end here. Obviously, he snapped. He went crazy, clearly. No. This happens in the 1650s. He's still contributing to mathematics and science during this time. You might be like, well, so do other people, like the guy in The Beautiful Mind, right? He was crazy and seeing people, but clearly, he was still very brilliant, mathematically speaking. Okay, I suppose you have to have found something to, but that actually is a good segue to get us into the actual wager, okay? So I am going to now open this, I'll open a document. Where did I put it? Right here. Okay, so let me pull this up. I need to minimize that. It's getting in my way. Minimize that. It's getting in my way. And I'm going to single page this. I did it single page. Sorry, I did it double page. We'll do a single page so that we can leave room for the camera so I don't block out any of the text. Okay, so with that done, here we go. That's Chrome. Okay, cool. All right, so here we are. This is, as you can see up here, the A.J. Kreilsheimer translation, the best translation, widely considered to be the best translation of Pascal. He originally wrote this in French, of course, which in the 1600s, it's the vernacular at the time. I wouldn't say most, I don't know what the statistics are, but Latin was still predominant, especially as a language among academics. So he writes this. Now, when was this published? This actually wasn't published until after his life. So this was published posthumously. It is known as the Pensées, which it's also considered it's like thoughts, which just means thoughts in French. It's also considered just fragments, collections, scraps of writing. Maybe he was intending to publish this at one point, but never got around to it. And so a later collector and publisher and editor put these together and published them. And they were eventually published after his death. Now, he died in 1662, but the first edition wasn't published until 1669. So, all right, so we pick up here the wager. Now, and I mention that because this being fragments, they aren't always standardized. Now, this one shows this is fragment 418, and other volumes. I've got for example, a French volume here. That's this is actually a folio classique, and I picked this up in 2010 in France. This was their bac, which is the bac is the high school exit exam, basically. And so they would have prescribed this. In fact, so Pascal is considered among French philosophers to be in the top two, right there, rivaling Descartes. Not just philosophers, but all French thinkers whatsoever throughout time. So so this one, for example, this puts the wager fragment number 397. This one names it 418. I've seen other ones that are in the 200. So it's just kind of, you don't know which one you're going to get. You kind of, which is a little unfortunate, but usually in the table of contents, it'll tell you this is the wager portion. And the difference between this one is many times you'll just see like stuff like this. This is a fragment. This is a scrap paper. This is another scrap of paper. This is another scrap of paper. This one with the wager, we see something that's really coherent, well put together. And so he says this. Let's start here. Our soul, infinity, nothing. Some translators just translate that as infinite. That's why I kind of stumbled. Infinite, nothing. Our soul is cast into the body where it finds number, time, dimensions. It reasons about these things and calls them natural or necessary and can believe nothing else. I scroll down here, kind of waxes eloquently in the next page. He thinks that we can know that God exists. Perhaps we may well know that God exists without knowing what he is. So, this is a nice segue for my last live streams with respect to Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. We may know that there is a first cause, for example. And of course, Pascal would have known and had Thomas Aquinas on the mind here. We can know that there's a first cause, but what the heck is he like? He says that there's an infinite vast chasm between God and human beings. He says the finite is annihilated in the presence of the infinite and becomes pure nothingness. Now, this will become important because if I'm finite and God is infinite, right? You might be thinking, well, I don't believe in any of this crap. Well, it's all speculative. If there is a God, I've highlighted this in blue for your very important attention. Please draw attention to this. If there is a God, what would he be like? Well, he's not going to be a domino. He's not going to be, a tiny little object. We're talking about the thing that is the creator of the universe. Okay. So if that thing exists, he probably is going to be far beyond our comprehension. He's going to be like the human being compared to an ant, right? So, but the finite is annihilated in the presence of the infinite and becomes, so you have this vast gap in understanding between what an ant can understand and what a human can understand. That becomes very important. Now he says here, like that, we may know that God exists without knowing what he is, but by faith we know his existence. Through glory we shall know his nature. This is another reference to scripture here. And then he says, let us now begin and speak according to our natural lights. If there is a God, he is infinitely beyond our comprehension. Since being indivisible and without limits, he bears no relation to us. We're therefore incapable of knowing either what he is or whether he is. So at this point, Pascal's taking a different angle. And it's important to notice this this shift, right? Up here, he was talking, well, even in the previous sentence, he's infinitely beyond our comprehension. This is making pretty summary summary descriptions of God. He's infinitely beyond our comprehension. We can't know what God is. He's like this, he's like this, he's not like this, he's not like this. And also, he may well exist. But he shifts from being like, okay, this is what God, but we may not know anything about him or whether he exists. So, that being so, who would dare attempt to answer these questions? Certainly not we, who bear no relation to him. Who then will condemn Christians for not being unable, for being unable to give rational grounds for their belief? Right? So, this is the position many atheists, many skeptics, right? Many detractors of faith will say, I told you so all along, right? Christians can't give rational grounds for their belief. And there you have it right there. Pascal is admitting you can't give rational grounds for your belief. Well, it's important to know what conditional presuppositions that he's forming here, right? So he's saying that if God is infinite, if there is a God, and if he's infinite, right? If you have those conditions, conditional statement, if and if, right? If this and if this, right? Then, well, you can't understand God. And so now that's a conditional statement. Does that mean that Pascal really truly does think that you can give no rational grounds for God? Many commentators have thought this, and that's why they call him a fideist. A fideist is basically a faithist, after the Greek word, or it might be the Latin word fides. So it's just, I don't need any reason whatsoever. I just believe my faith and so on. And of course, atheists at this point, they're going to snap, they're going to bite, they're going to say, aha, what about imaginary gods? What about imaginary people? What about Santa Claus? What about the flying spaghetti monster? Yeah, well, you'll see later down here, let me just skip and spoil a surprise, but does think that, is there really, so he's imagining an imaginary objector saying here, I confess I admit it, but is there really no way of seeing what the cards are? Like, give me a little bit of clues, bud. Like, you can't just believe so. And he says, yeah, scripture and the rest. There are pieces of evidence out there. Okay, back to that, right? That we're believing in the Bigfoot or the fairy, the tooth fairy and so on. All right, but again, understand that this right here is within the bounds of a conditional. If there is a God, and if so, then if there is a God and he is infinitely beyond our comprehension, then we can't understand him. That just follows logically, right? Now, and so, right, because again, this would be consistent with Christians saying that, and this is after a passage in, as we click here, after a passage in 1 Corinthians 1:18, he says that the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing, or in the Latin Vulgate translation, which Pascal probably would have been using, is stultitium, which is stultedness or stupefiedness. All right. So, in expounding the world, and then you complain that they do not prove it. And then this is an interesting thing. He says, if they did prove it, they would not be keeping their word. Right? That's a very interesting throwaway line. It is by being without proof that they show that they are not without sense. Okay. Now, this is all within the bounds of that's still that same conditional. If there's a God, if we can't understand him, then we couldn't understand him. That just follows logically. And of course, this would be consistent, as he's saying, with scripture, which is what the Bible teaches. Now, that is a certain position one could hold. Is Pascal holding it? Many commentators think that he was. But we continue in this imagined objector saying this. Okay, well, although that excuses those who offer their religion as such, like, oh, there is no proof, there's no grounds, and it absolves them, excuses them from the criticism of producing it without rational grounds, it does not absolve those who accept it. Because, the rest of us are rational, reasonable people, and if we were to just buy into this stupid, silly, evidenceless, reasonless fairy tale, then we would be to blame, right? It does not absolve those who accept it are blameworthy. Like, you should not be believing a fairy tale. Okay, he says, well, I'll bite. Let's examine this point. Let us say either God is or he is not. Now, that's just the law of excluded middle, I believe. I can't remember if that's the law of excluded middle or, yeah, the law of excluded middle. The either A or B. Sorry, not either A or not A. There is no in between. Either God exists or he doesn't exist, because you can't halfway exist. This is just the law of logic. All right. And if you want to turn that into its negation, it's not the case that both A and not A. That would be the law of non-contradiction. Both are at work here. So either God is or he isn't. Most people are going to say, well, no, he's not. But that at least we can all agree on. But to which view shall we be inclined? Reason cannot decide this question, right? But what does he mean? Definitively, reason can't decide this question? Well, no. He's still working within the bounds of this. If there's a God and if we can't understand him. Okay. Reason cannot decide this question. Infinite chaos separates us. At the far end of this infinite distance, a coin is being spun, which will come down heads or tails. How will you wager? Reason cannot make you choose either. Reason cannot prove either wrong. Do not condemn as wrong those who have made a choice, for you know nothing about it. And he says, this is the objector again. I should have highlighted in green, perhaps. He says, no, but I will condemn them for not. I will condemn them not for having made this particular choice, but any choice. You see, because any choice is silly, right? And he says, yes, but you must wager as a forced choice. There is no choice. You're already committed. Which will you choose then? And then he goes through the wager, right? But we'll come back to why I underlined that heads. I think it's very, very interesting. So far, so good. And I find it really, really, we're not into the wager yet. We're just on the precipice of it. And I find it really interesting that most of the people who were in the chat and that vomited all over the chat here with their really hostile and red herrings and non sequiturs and so on didn't stick around. We were now down to just a couple of people in this stream, in the live stream. Hopefully the results will be better. Of course, we will see, but we've got, I'll respond to a couple of these. They're not here to listen to it. It's almost like students who they ask a question and then just don't listen to the answer. What a great student, right? If you are still here, raise your hand. I doubt that anybody actually who put these comments in here are still here, but we'll do it. So he says here, how can anyone with a mind can think with a mind that can think? I don't know. I'll pen this for ease of reference here. How can anyone with a mind can think, convincing the Pascal's wager? Perhaps he's not an English speaker, so I'm not going to. That only proves you should bet for the existence of God. You should. Okay, so he thinks that perhaps. Let me say more about this, because I think he probably thinks this is a criticism against the wager, that you have to bet for it, or a criticism about belief in God, that you just have to bet for it. You just have to wager on it. This is one avenue, one perspective. I certainly don't think it's the only perspective, but I'm covering it because probably should have mentioned this at the very beginning. I'm covering it because it's a worthwhile consideration. The wager is not an evidential argument for God's existence. It is a pragmatic argument for God's existence, right? The idea, and you'll see, the idea that you are better off in a cost-benefit scenario than if you were to wager for the existence of God in Christianity than not. Okay, so right here, let's go to a different. Okay, yes. Place pin measure. So he says here, XE Music says there are more than 1,000 gods. Actually, if you take into account Hinduism, there are more than 3 million gods. So yes, that's true. There's more than 1,000. Pascal wager only applies to one. And then he says here, no punishment for not accepting Ahura Mazda, which Christianity copied in part. No, it didn't. So this is called the many gods objection. And like I said at the very beginning, you guys, I said that people are going to put this out there and then they're going to run away and not stay around for the actual answer. So it's interesting behavior from certain people. It tells you a lot about their psychology, that they're going to ask an answer and then just kind of run away. Okay, we've got another person here that just apparently just drops this truth bomb for us, right? Recreated God and then just runs away. That's the only thing that they ever said and in the chat, and we have no idea what they're going to say anymore. And then right here, another one here. Right here, do they still award PhDs in alchemy? I assume this is directed at me because why else would we be saying it? I have my PhD in philosophy, brother, and it's funny you mentioned alchemy because I actually mentioned this to my students as well. You know, you probably wouldn't believe that a historian of science and chemist at Johns Hopkins University, last I checked, the #7 top university in the United States of America. It's obviously a country that's really great and got great schools. You wouldn't believe that such a person would be studying alchemy, yet they are. His name's Lawrence Principe, and or Princip, depending on how you pronounce it. And yeah, he's been written up in the Smithsonian Magazine on his experiments in alchemy. So there you go, bro. So I don't think they award PhDs in alchemy, and mine's not in alchemy. Yeah, and this is fascinating as well too. Oh man, boy, right? So good logic in the days of alchemy. Again, dropping a comment and running away. You know, I would guarantee you this guy, he's been on my channel for a while. He's just been kind of, I won't call it trolling because sometimes he says some reasonable things, sometimes he doesn't. But yeah, so this one is a troll comment. It's ironic that maybe he wasn't around when I was discussing all of Pascal's incredible achievements in the fields of mathematics and physics, fluids, dynamics, geometry. He invented the first mechanical calculator. He's the father of public transportation. He laid out with Fermat the foundations of probabilistic calculus. Yeah, he didn't stay around for all that, but yeah, I call it alchemy and just be dismissive about that. So, all right, what you're all here for, the actual wager. Let's jump into it. I won't actually show you the passage here because I think I've got something better, which is a chart. All right. Now I pulled this up, as you can see here from the file name. I pulled on. It's not really unfortunate that it's going to block some stuff. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So I pulled this up from the, as you can see in the file name, what is it? rem.net, whatever that is. I'm not familiar with that. I was just searching for images. So I really like this one because it says, so across the top is that proposition he started off with, and this is just law of excluded middle. God either exists or God doesn't exist. Across the left-hand side, sorry, this is what you wager. This is your belief. And then there we have it again. Somebody else in the show. I've seen you before as well. Wait, and you'll get to the many gods objection. I've actually got a chart for the many gods objection. So if you hang tight and don't run away like the rest of these cowards, then you'll actually get your answer. Assuming that you want an answer and just didn't want to just troll. All right, reality in this left-hand side. God either exists or doesn't exist, and then you wager right here whether God exists or not. Obviously, if God exists, and you believe that God exists, you wager that God exists, and you act and you behave as if God exists, there is potentially infinite reward to be gained. If you wager as an atheist does, so this would be a theist, this would be an atheist, no God. If you wager as an atheist does, that there is no God, even though there is one, that's infinite loss, because you end up in inferno, as Dante would put it, in hell. All right. Over here, you end up in in potentially infinite punishment. I appreciate that description. So potentially infinite reward, potentially infinite punishment. All right. Right over here, you have, if in reality there is no God, and you wager that if God exists, there is no loss right here. But over here, if you wager that there is no God, there's no reward, or at least the loss is a finite loss. Let's say it's like, so you might have to go to church, right? Because you're wagering that God exists. You might have to go to church. You might have to, read the Bible and go to Bible studies and act as if God exists. So you're you're living a moral life, let's suppose, and all those troublesome, compromises you have to make with respect to like trying to be a good person, all that right there. Man, you could have had more nights partying or something, so that would be the loss considerably, but it would be a finite loss, right? You would live, and then of course you might even think, well, you would also have the loss of being wrong. I don't even think you'd have the loss of being wrong, because after you die, nothing happens on this view. So this is just assuming this is atheism over here, and this is theism right here. But right here, no reward. There is a finite reward, I would say. So I don't agree with this chart in full, whoever made this. There's a finite reward with respect to the soulless pleasures one gets to engage in. You get to laugh at theists for believing in fairy tales and the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and flying spaghetti monster and all that. So there's some reward in that. There's some smug self-satisfaction, being able to look at others and know that they're wrong. But actually, would you even know it? You don't know it, because you're just hoping that you get. So there certainly is no reward. It'd be a finite reward, if anything, right? You get to go party or whatever, because there's nothing after this. But would there be a satisfaction, right? You matched up no God to no God. Would there be? No, because after you die, nothing happens. So, all right. Stop sharing that. Now, the obvious rejoinder to this is going to be actually, let me show you this first. This is by, I pulled this one. I like it because it's got this, obviously this additional column out here to the right, expected value. So this makes it, but you don't get the value right here and the value right here in each of the 4 boxes. So it's very interesting. This is actually by, you can see at the top here, by Liz Jackson. Liz Jackson has a few papers on Pascal's wager. And interestingly, she has cited me in the acknowledgments of at least one of them, because I helped her work through an idea, but she did all the work and she worked through it all. So this is one, just like your standard one. I will now bring up, just to acclimate you to why there's this additional column over here. But now let me start sharing that one, and I will show you the many gods table right here that has that extra column. All right, this is what it looks like. So you have here, this is what you've all been waiting for. You believe in the Christian God versus the Christian God exists right here. So this is, she's also changed it. She's modified it to where now belief is on the left and the reality of the situation is on the top, right? So it's a little bit kind of, interesting, but different. But right here, instead of having no God, you have an alternative possibility. Now, well, actually, it would be at the top here. Now, instead of no God, like atheism is true, you now have the Muslim God exists right here. Now over here, this is where atheism is true. And you can actually have like Judaism, you can have Hinduism, which God is that, and which God is that, and which God, and somebody in the comments mentioned the Ahura Mazda. Nobody, I doubt, today believes who that is. Yeah, the Muslim deity is the Christian deity. Now that, my friend, I assuming you're doing this in good conscience, that you're not just trying to be combative or anything, but no theologian thinks that simpliciter with no explanation needed. They are, well, actually, if you were to believe that, you would need some nuance with respect to. So here would be some nuance. They're the same object, that is like the same substance, the same deity, let's say, but with respect to the perspectives of the people worshiping them, like as you said, they have different theology. But you do have to nuance that. I think it's a little bit simplistic to just say they're just the same deity, just different theology. How, but yeah, the Abrahamic faith, and I added the nuance. Yeah, okay, so I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah, now looking back at it, now there's a debate there though, and even with respect to like Mormons, for example, some people will say, well, Mormon God isn't God, and yeah, so if you don't believe God exists, then you can just say, well, there's not the same deity at all, right? But if you do believe, like, so it needs some. Here's the nuance that you need. You got to kind of be flustered on this. So here's the nuance that you need. If that God exists, it is the same object. If that God does not exist, if there is no such thing as any deity whatsoever, then there is no object out there. And so all that matters is the theology. All that matters is the perspective. All that matters is the story we keep telling ourselves. And if that's all that matters, then you have one story versus another story, and those are completely different stories. So, all right. Let me jump back into the wager. Okay. Okay, you must wager. There is no choice. You already committed. Which will you choose then? He says, right here, he says that leaves no choice. Whether there's infinity, where there are not infinite chances of losing against that of winning, there is no room for hesitation. You must give everything. And since you are obliged to play, right, you're already playing this game whether you know it or not. Since you're obliged to play, you must be renouncing reason if you hoard your life rather than risk it for an infinite gain. If these really are the values, God, I hate that stupid thumbs up thing. Hey, what's up, Ace? If these really are the values here, right, and we'll go back to the original and I'll get to the many gods objection again. If these are the value right here, you have infinite reward versus infinite loss. That's an infinite chasm. Then you would be foolish not to stake your wager on infinite gain. And you might think, well, I don't agree with that chart. As he says, yes, but you must wager. There is no choice. You're already committed. Why? By the logic of the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle. Either God exists or he doesn't. Okay, and if you want to add in extra gods, that's fine too. But you've got to do a chart for each one of those gods. Either that a God exists, or that God exists, or that God exists, or that God. Make the chart as big as you want, but you're still playing. Now, to the right here, let me show you the many gods chart again. So actually, let me show you her article because I think she put it really well. I've got her article down here. It's one of her articles anyway. She's got a few on this. This is Liz Jackson, a colleague, a friend of mine. So I will show you this. So she says it better than I can. So she says this, right? So this chart actually comes from her stuff right here. This is the many gods objection. And then she says this. You might think the decision makers are telling us to believe either religion is better than believing atheists. However, this possibility, atheists go to heaven, theists go to hell. Okay. And then she says a common objection to the many gods objection can be summarized in 2 words. Probability matters. By the way, this article I'm getting from 1,000-Word Philosophy, Introductory Anthology. You can find this online, but she's also got more academic papers as well on this. So it matters even when dealing with infinite values. As you can see, imagine you're given the choice between a 90% chance of infinite good or a 10% chance of same good. You should clearly take the 90% chance, obviously. In other words, you should wager for the religion that you think is most likely to be true. Christianity and Islam actually do not have the same expected value. Wagering on the more probable religion gives you a higher chance at the infinite good, and so has a higher expected value. Now, that was a response, as many of you were in the comments, wondering about the many gods objection and backing it with all your might. Now's the time to open the floor. What do you guys think about that? Other than, oh, it's bollocks. There were not equal expected values here, as she said here. All things being equal, right? Because she says they do not have the same expected value because one religion is more probable than the other, and that you could find the evidence. Right. So if I were to compare, for example, the evidence for Christianity versus the evidence for, I don't know, somebody in the chat said Ahura Mazda, right? Or Quetzalcoatl, right? Or Thor and Odin, or gosh, even Jedi is an established religion now because, you know, people want to be all tongue in cheek and everything. So if I were to wager the evidence, if I would wager based on the strength of the evidence, then Christianity would clearly come out on top. Compared to all those, you might think, well, what about compared to Islam? Well, go look up Islam apologetics, compare it to Christian apologetics. Ah, yes, ace trades. You know, I would show you my math. I'm not a probabilistic calculus mathematician, but the author of this work is. He, in fact, did some major work with, as I said in the beginning, which you weren't here for. He was a man of reason. He was a man of mathematics and physics. As I said before, he did some pioneering work. He's inventor of the mechanical calculator. I did some pioneering work on probability theory with Pierre de Fermat, and influence things like probabilistic calculus, laid the foundation for Leibniz's formulation of calculus. So, yeah. Oh, the math doesn't exist. You know, go look it up in Pascal. I'm not my brother's keeper, man. If you want to go look up this evidence for yourself, by all means. I'm not the last person and shred of evidence that you should hang your hat on, right? I really hope that nobody is in this room thinking this is my last hope, right? Like, if I'm a reasonable person, I would say, okay, this is more evidence to add to my whole cache of evidence over here, right? Like this video, what I'm being presented with right now, this is more evidence that I can add to my bucket of evidence, and maybe it goes up, maybe it goes down, but I have different propositions here that can be supported or negated by what the evidence here is being presented is. So I'm not the end all, the final nail in the coffin for anybody. I hope so. If I found out the math doesn't exist, what do you mean by the math doesn't exist? This is probability theory, and this is a decision matrix. What do you mean the math doesn't exist? Let me show you this. Do you mean with respect to? Let's just go simple here. The original matrix here. This is a decision matrix right here. You might be thinking infinite. What do you mean by infinite? Well, this, by the way, this is supported by a conditional presupposition, like we said in the very beginning. He talks about, like, suppose God exists. Suppose it's a God like that. That, you know, the Christians in their infinite wisdom tell us this, like, oh, well, it's got to be a God that's infinite. It's beyond all reasons, beyond all comprehension. Okay, well, if that's an if. If that God exists, then this follows. Okay, this is conditional presupposition. If that God exists right here, then he goes in this box. That's it. That's all we're saying. So I don't know what you mean by the math doesn't exist. This is supported by a conditional presupposition in the text, and I will show you where that is as well. Right here. He says on the prior page, right? If there is a God, I've even highlighted for you. He's infinitely, and if there's a God, and if he's infinitely beyond our comprehension, then we just can't come to know this God. He bears no relation to us. If that's a God like that, and this is actually what got us into the wager, because the wager is not an evidential argument for God. It's a pragmatic argument for God. And all this to say, not only should I not be the only evidence in your evidence bucket, but this shouldn't be the only evidence in your evidence bucket. He doesn't think that there are only pragmatic arguments for God's existence right here. He says, you know, this is just one of them. He thinks that there are other evidences right here, right? Scripture and the rest. And we can assume that since he's using a rational argument, albeit a rational argument with respect to pragmatic value, that there are other rational arguments with respect to evidential value to proving God's existence. And in fact, why would we think that? Well, are we just going to read the Bible? Are you just going to do what it says, right? That's another, you know, I'm not even looking at it. I can imagine these are very sad, sorry kind of objection. But right here. All right. Yeah, lost. All right, let's go back to that and see what you guys have to say. If the deity is beyond understanding, you can't bet on it either. That's an interesting claim, Michael. Why think that? I'm actually intrigued by this response. Here's my thought while you're formulating that, and I don't mean to, you know, you can mute me if you don't want to think and write at the same time and have me talk at the same time. But yeah, so if the deity is beyond understanding, you can't bet on it either. My answer to this would be the deity is beyond understanding, but the proposition that that deity exists is not beyond understanding. That's a simple, I could write that on a chalkboard. This deity blank exists, right? I may not fully understand. In fact, look, I'll show you right here. He says, we may well know that God exists without knowing what he is. We may well know that God exists without knowing what he is, right? And he says, I've already proved that it's quite possible to know that something exists without knowing its nature. So even if this God is infinite and beyond all comprehension, doesn't mean that you can't know certain things like that he exists. So this is another thing in favor. This completes the thought that I blanked on earlier. He does think that you can know that God exists, and that's evidence. Why think that? Let me go back here. So I'm not missing anybody. He says here, not only we may well know that God exists without knowing, so he thinks it's possible maybe we can know that God exists, but he also says here, it's quite possible to know something exists without knowing of its nature. And then he says up here, we know the existence of nature and the nature of the infinite. We know the existence of the infinite without knowing its nature. We do not know either the existence or the nature of God because he has no center or limits, right? But all that, although we don't know the existence or nature of God, it is possible to know that something exists without knowing its nature. That seems to negate what he says up here, but I'm just reading through what he says, man. These are fragments. So, okay. Yeah, so let me go to your reply. You can't make any claims about it. I think that you can. Now, here's the thing, though. Like what you're saying here, this claim you can't make any claims about God. This would be apophaticism, or what's called apophatic theology. Apophatic just means like negative theology. The idea that we can't know anything positive about God, but you can know negative things about God, namely that he's unknowable. That's one thing that you can know about God, right? You can't make a claim. I can at least make this claim, right? He's saying this. You're making claims about something you can't understand. I can make a claim about that something I can understand, namely that I can't understand it. Like, how hard is that? That's a proposition that involves something unknowable. Like, we make propositions like this all the time. I don't know where my car is. I don't know this, that, or the other, right? How would one know that X exists? Yeah. So again, right here, and you've been around for a while, Ace Trades, thanks for being here. But I don't know if you were here for this. So again, this is all conditional presupposition. If there's a God, and if so, then he would be infinitely beyond our comprehension. So then we need to get into the wager, and that's how he begins it, right? You got a wager because this is a pragmatic, not an evidential argument. But he doesn't necessarily think this is kind of an open question within the commentators and scholars on Pascal. Do we think that Pascal was a true fideist, or even if he was a fideist, like a faithist? Do we think that he was a strong fideist or a weak fideist? It's really kind of open because he didn't come out and I just say these things. But what does he think about with respect to evidence? Well, if you look just a couple pages down, he says right here, he says, an imaginary objector says, yeah, but is there no way of seeing what the cards are? Can't you just give me a little bit of hint? Why can't I just know a little bit about God? And he says, yeah, there is a way, scripture and the rest. And the rest, I presume that he means not just scripture, but also natural theology, which have been certainly within his realm of understanding. Natural theology, again, is the idea that you can know things about God from nature. This also is considered natural philosophy as well. All right. So if you guys love that, you're really going to hate this. If you love that, you're going to love it. If you hate it, you're going to hate it. This, by the way, he asked you to be stupid. I know the resounding chorus of skeptics in the chat are gonna really eat this up. Oh, he's telling us to be dumb. He's telling us to be stupid. I knew it all along. He's just confirming what we knew all along. You gotta read Pascal very carefully. Okay, is he really telling you to be stupid? Well, let's take a look. So he says, first of all, we need to understand that this is happening within a conversation of an imaginative objector here, right? So is there no way of seeing? Yeah, you got to look at evidence. And he says here, well, what if I can't believe? the objector says, I am so made that I cannot believe. I've tried and tried and tried, but I just can't force myself to believe. This is what he says. He says, if you're unable to believe, it's because of your passions, since reason impels you to believe, and yet you cannot do so. Concentrate then, not on convincing yourself by multiplying proofs of God's existence, but by diminishing your passions. And then later down here, he says, oh, actually, let's keep going. He says, you want to find faith, you do not know the road, you want to be cured of unbelief, you ask for the remedy. Learn from those who were once bound like you and now wager all they have. They behaved, I'll skip ahead, just as if they did believe. They went through the motions. They faked it until they made it. Taking holy water, having masses said, and so on. That will make you believe quite naturally and will make you more docile. And in fact, here, if I look at the footnote here, abetir, the word, it's actually reflexive, so sabatir, means something like to make stupid, to stupefy. This translator, one of the best translators here, says to make you more docile. All right, before I get into what it actually means, what do you guys think? What do you think he means here? Does he really mean make yourself stupid? Taking all that holy water, right? Going to church. Just read your Bible. Just go through the motions. That's going to make you believe, right? It's almost like he's asking you to join a cult almost, right? We've got a lot of skeptical people here in the chat, and I want to know what you guys think. Don't get quiet on me now. I'll wait. Yeah, you guys, or maybe you don't know what he means. That's fine. And maybe I've already flagged it for you that, oh, of course he means something stupid, but what else could he mean? I was making a sandwich. Good. Make one for me. Thanks. Well, let's get into this. Okay. What's never seen a religion in a cult? Well, that's a great idea. Cults are usually much smaller. There is cult studies in religious studies as a subset of religious studies, just like a cult is a subset of religions. Or, yeah. I can refer you to some authors on this. Skepticism desires to have as many true and as few beliefs as possible, few false. Let me work through this. Okay, skepticism is the desire to have as many true beliefs and as few false beliefs as possible. I wouldn't call. First of all, I think that's a great approach. Have the most true beliefs and the fewest false beliefs. That's great. I wouldn't call that skepticism, though. I think that's the middle of the road. I think skeptical, if you're thinking about this as a filter, either too weak of a filter, you would be gullible. You'd accept all beliefs. Or if your filter is too strong, that would be radically skeptical. I would put the skeptical temperament more on that radical skeptical into the spectrum. Yeah. Technically speaking, right here, XE Music, atheism could believe in ghosts, past lives, afterlife, and just about anything without a god. I don't know if this is directed to me, but I saw and I'll reply to it. True. And there's a lot of atheists or naturalists, let's say, actually not naturalists, the atheists who are non-naturalists. That is the idea that God doesn't exist, that's the atheist part, and that they're non-natural, however, with respect to the world. They believe in certain non-natural, wouldn't call them supernatural, but non-natural realities, such as mathematical objects, logical truths, that sort of thing. You got it, Ace. All right. Let's unpin that. We're going to go back to the text. As fun as this has been, nobody seems to have an alternative explanation of what the hell he could mean right here. That will make you more docile. Obviously, those idiot religious believers, right? Am I right? This idiot religious believers, they're just gonna go through the motions, and then it's just like joining a cult. They're just gonna join a cult, right? Well, let's see what he says here. Actually, and of course, this is what I'm afraid of. What do you have to lose? Okay, if I look up abetir, all right, and there have been several translations of this word. Let me put in the chat here the original, which would just be abetir, means to make oneself dumb or perhaps to stupefy. Another alternative word that some commentators and translators prefer would be something like alestir. Alestir. It's another French. This means to relieve, not in the sense to relieve yourself like you're going to the bathroom, or relieving yourself like laying on a Shakti mat or something like I did last night, or actually this morning. You get relief in that, sure, but this means to like relieve somebody from their position, like in the military, something like that, you know, a relief pitcher or something like that. So alestir means something to like relieve. Well, this means in the place of the will is replaced with passions. Oh, actually, the will, sorry. Passions and the will is replaced with action right here. So another one says that if you do this switch, you will come to do what is called assagir, which means something like to be relieved or to tamp down or to be stable. Okay. So this is what this means. So let's go back to the text here, and I'll get to that. Thank you for highlighting my name so I know there's a question. But free to keep talking to each other. That's fine. I love it. So he says here, first of all, a couple of really important things to point out. First of all, what did the objector say in the beginning? He says, I am so made that I cannot believe. But look, I am being forced to wager, I'm not free, I'm being held fast. I am being made so that I cannot believe. We have here an actual desire by the objector to want to believe. He's in the position, like if you're trying to identify like where's he coming in, it's not in this dig in your heels, I don't care about this. It's certainly not apathetic. Dig in your heels, I don't want to believe this, I reject it. It is, I accept the wager. Like I accept that I want infinite value, but I can't believe it. This would be the belief problem. And this would, by the way, actually, I'll separate it like that. Yeah. So there's a view in philosophy called doxastic voluntarism in epistemology, and its counterpart doxastic involuntarism. And so this is somebody who wants to believe. And I'll pull this back up. I'll pull Liz Jackson's piece up here because she says it really well. She words it really well. It's very succinct. You know, it's a benefit of doing something just in 1,000 words here. Although, you know, anybody who's just tuning in, this is not just somebody. This is an academic. She got a doctorate from Notre Dame, and she's at Ryerson, or at least so far. She's moved since then. Anyway, so here she says here the irrationality objection. Oh no, it's actually up here. The impossibility objection. Wagering is impossible. So the objection goes, because we can't form beliefs simply for their benefits. If I offer you $1 million, 1 = 3, you probably still can't believe it. And she's right that most philosophers do reject this view called doxastic voluntarism, the view that we can directly control our beliefs. However, most philosophers who reject that also affirm voluntarism or doxastic involuntarism, the idea that you do have some kind of control over your beliefs, certain beliefs. Like, for example, whether God exists isn't obviously true or false, like 1 + 1 = 3. Like, so some argue that you have more control over your religious beliefs. And here's a parallel she draws with respect to political beliefs. It's the control like you could exercise over your political beliefs, like changing the news sources that you read. In other words, you can come to believe a different way, right? Not something as obvious and certain and definitive as this, right? But something that isn't obviously true, like the jury's still out or it's not certain with respect to that. You can do this by going, circumventing your will, in other words, or actually using the will to circumvent your reason here. And I know that sounds weird, but we do it all the time, right? Because here, my reason so far in my political beliefs, suppose that I'm like extremely conservative, like MAGA, you know, make America great again, Trumper, you know, and I'm extremely like, and so my reason, all my reason has seen, and all my reason has been informed by is Trump, right? I want to use my will to circumvent my reason in that sense, because my reason is convinced based on the evidence I've seen that that's the greatest view, right? So I need to use my will by changing my perspective, looking at other evidence, so that my reason now becomes informed by other evidence, which heretofore I've just not encountered, not considered, not taken into account whatsoever. Okay, so that is what we are proposing here, and I'll get to those questions. I really love the highlight, guys. Back to the text then. So this is somebody who wants to believe, can't believe. Okay, well, just as Liz Jackson was describing here, you can do things indirectly to change your belief. For example, if you're unable to believe, it's because of your passions. Well, because you're really, really convinced that a certain thing is true or whatever. So don't go around looking for more arguments for God's existence, but by diminishing your passions. And by doing this, you actually go diminish your passions. So he gives a couple of pieces of advice here. First, diminish your passions. Like, check. So if I'm a Trumper, right, then I want to actually realize that maybe I'm being a little bit too severe about this, right? Maybe, right. It's not that I need to go around looking for more proof. I need to probably do a check-in with myself and realize that I'm being a little bit too adamant with respect to, like, I see this with atheists all the time, and sorry if any of you guys are called out, but I'm not necessarily thinking about any of you in particular, but I'm just thinking anecdotally, I see this all the time. I see people, YouTubers even, who fashion their entire identity around being an ex-Christian, like, and they form like these, maybe it's because it hits really deep for them and they've experienced some abuse or some scandal or something like that. And now in that case, I would understand. But like, if you're just following along with reason in particular, then this shouldn't be something that like really lights you up and that you're really, really adamant about. It's just, yeah, PTSD. That's a great point for it. Like, maybe you were so scandalized and you're so hurt that that's all you can think about. I get it. But if atheism is true, who gives a crap about what all those religious people are doing? In the end, it doesn't matter. Like, and so I find it really, really hard to believe, or hard to understand why somebody would just like, yes, we have no purpose. Like, if you want to be a nihilist about it, yes, there's no purpose, and there's no meaning in life, and there's no hope whatsoever. But why would I choose that? Why would I choose that at all? Like, I mean, maybe it makes you happy. Cool. You're, in that hedonistic kind of approach to morality, and you're just going to go after things that make you happy. But that's fine. But I just find it really puzzling. Like, if religious people are just a bunch of dumb idiots, just take the W and leave. Like, just go have fun. Just do whatever you want to with pleasure in your life. Go, whatever it is. But I just don't get it, honestly. In any case, so back to this. So diminish your passions. All right. It's also important. Anything I highlight in blue is incredibly important. So here he acknowledges that this hypothetical objector, I want to believe, but I can't. He says, you want to find faith. So this is not somebody, again, who is trying to be convinced that the wager is true. They already know that the wager is the correct reasoning to approach this thing. They bought into that. They agree. They agree that it is infinitely more beneficial for me to believe that God exists. And so I want that faith. That's the position. That's where they are. All right. So they want faith, but they can't do it. They don't know the road. I want to be curative in belief. And I ask, how do I do that? And so this is where he gives this advice. Go through the motions. Take holy water, say masses, and so on. And he says, you will become docile, or abetir. Now, abetir, as I mentioned earlier, means to stupefy, almost to make stupid. This doesn't mean that you're stupid. This doesn't mean that you listen to no evidence. This means that it's almost like a numbing effect, right? This idea that you've got this part of you that is completely, again, we'll use the example of Trump, like that is completely overwhelming your life. And you're to the point now that you realize that's probably unhealthy. And I would like to believe the other way, but I just can't see evidence for it. In that case, what you do is you need to numb yourself to those emotions that you feel. Like, you get flared up anytime you see a pride flag, for example. Like, well, numb those emotions, right? Because you're convinced already that you're wrong and you want your belief to change, but you can't make yourself do it. That's the position. So numb yourself to the fact that you're already to the point that you want to change your belief. So this is like a higher order of reasoning. I would like to not believe that. Okay. So what do I do with that right there? Numb those feelings with respect to this position, this camp, this militant camp that you've bought into. Like, remove the emotions. That's what this translation means by make yourself more docile. It's interesting this translator also used the term docile, because in virtue ethics, there's a virtue known as docility, which doesn't mean more peaceful or placable or something like that. It means something like teachable. So make yourself more teachable. It's an interesting word choice that he chooses there, docile. Okay. Now, I will get to some of these questions here. And again, thank you for highlighting so I know when it's directed at me, because I know you guys are talking to each other as well. Okay. Yes, Ace Trade. Sorry, I got out of the conversation we were in. That's unfortunate about these chats and live streams, is that you can't just like continue a conversation. Like, I would really, really love that, in fact. But he says here, so we can agree, we both care about the truth. We both want as many true and as few false beliefs as possible. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's just, I wouldn't call that position skepticism. I just wouldn't. I don't even know if it has a term for it, honestly. It's just the idea that you want to reject as many false beliefs and approve as many true beliefs as you possibly can. But I think being aware of both radical ends of the spectrum here is super duper important. Like I pointed out in earlier videos, like, you don't want to be gullible, so you don't want to accept all beliefs. That would be way too extreme. You also don't want to reject all beliefs either. You don't want to be so skeptical, and that's why I hesitate to call this skepticism, because I would call that end of the spectrum where you reject all beliefs, I would call that radical skepticism. So that's just me trying to be consistent with the terminology. And what I think of when I think of skeptics, I don't think of them as like, yeah, is that. Okay, I'm going to kind of glance through here as well. Okay. Yes, either there is a God, there either is a God or there isn't a God. Yeah, thank you. I'm really grateful that you agree with that. Honestly, that's just agreeing with the law of logic, the law of excluded middle, the law of non-contradiction. Like, this just, like, there is no in-between existence. There's no in-between, like, and hey, you might be like, well, which God? Well, do the same proposition for every single God. This, like, a God, well, a Christian, either there's a Christian God or there isn't a Christian God. That's it. So either A or not A. That is a law of logic. Either there is a 1,222nd Hindu God, or there's not a 1,222nd Hindu God. That, I mean, just do it for every single God you can imagine, and the same result will follow. It either exists or it doesn't exist. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, you can make this work a lot easier for you and reduce your labor by a lot by just handling the propositions that sort of sort of umbrella these as well. Like, so the propositions, the central propositions with respect to Hinduism, you can just address rather than just looking at every single God. All right. So this one says, what is your definition of atheism? I bet it's not what most folks mean when they use that word. I don't know what most folks mean. Yeah, I'm getting a connection problem too, Ace. Sorry about that. It could be on my end. And if this ends, it ends, but I'll continue going while I can. So, so my definition of atheism, and I have to be careful here and nuanced and like careful and precise in my wording, because because some people will just be like, well, we don't believe any beliefs. So first I'll say atheism is just a lack of belief in God. Okay, so it can be formulated that way. It can be formulated as lack of belief, but I also think it can be formulated as that there are no gods. And now it's a positive formulation as opposed to a negative formulation. Negative formulation, a proposition, would be that no gods exist, okay, or a lack of belief in any gods. And then, well, sorry, one of those was positive. First one was positive. So lack of gods, lack of belief would be a negative formulation, or you can formulate it positively, that there are no gods. And if you're making a positive, which I think, first of all, I think those are logically equivalent. A lack of belief is just, you can either do this, you can, well, actually, you're not logically equivalent, so I should be careful with that. Again, you got to be careful with these things. But here's the thing. So regardless of what you characterize atheism as, I think that every atheist has, in addition to thinking that God doesn't exist, or that God doesn't exist, or whatever God doesn't exist, or it's a lack of belief in any gods, I think below that, beneath that, is a different presumption that's more fundamental with respect to the worldview. All right. And that is always formulated positively. Like, so it's going to be a belief in naturalism. Okay. It's going to be a belief in the materialism or something. And those, I think, if I'm a Christian, like, which I am, and I'm a Christian theist, those are the ones I go after, because I don't think that, so what do you mean by inputting belief into other people's heads? I'm going off experience and the fact that everybody has a worldview. So my experience is anecdotal, and I have a lot of experience discussing with atheists, and I have a lot of experience reading atheists. And yeah, so I don't know what you mean by, asserting that others deep inside think that there isn't a God. I'm not asserting, but I'm just answering your question, bro. I'm not asserting that you believe or that person believes, or this is not a particular claim. It's definitional. I'm asserting what definitionally speaking, what atheism is. Like, you asked me a question, how would you define atheism? I'm just giving you the answer. So, and hey, if you adhere to this atheism definition that I'm describing, then that would mean that you affirm that that's the belief in your mind. Like, I'm not doing it for you. People believe that. So I don't know what you're talking about. If I don't, now that's a better question. If I don't have a belief in God, does that mean that I think no God exists? Not necessarily. Those aren't logically equivalent, right? Because it could be that I think I've just never considered the question of whether a God exists, right? Suppose that I'm born and I'm raised atheist, or with respect, framed in this way, as you put it, I don't have any belief in God because it's just never been presented to me, right? That doesn't mean that. So if I'm raised like that, then I will not have any conception of God either. And so I have no conception of God to deny or reject. So, but I don't think anybody in this chat can claim ignorance with respect to not knowing any conception of God whatsoever. Like, that's not the position that any of us find ourselves in. Like, we have conceptions of God. And so when we are denying that, when we say I completely lack belief in God, look, I would say that's probably more closely defined as agnosticism, right? That is so in epistemology, there are three belief attitudes. There are belief, there are disbelief, and there are withholding belief. So agnosticism, I would consider much more close to withholding. Like, not with respect to like I'm actively withholding, but maybe I've just never encountered the proposition, right? Like the existence of God. Well, what God? Because I've never even considered any conception of God whatsoever. So I don't even know what gods you're talking about. But as I said, nobody in the chat can feign ignorance about this. We all, especially since you're here in my voice right now, none of us can feign ignorance with respect to what knowing, having in mind some conception of God, which they either affirm or reject. So, that's, yeah. So, yeah, I appreciate this. And boy, do I appreciate it, Exy. Music, word roots don't always dictate the modern meaning. Absolutely, yeah. I'm kind of a language nerd. I love etymology. It's kind of my side hobby here. If you go to I get no hits or no benefit from anybody ever looking at this stuff. But But if you are also a language nerd, I'm going to drop in the chat my section on my website, which is it's my dissertation. But if you scroll way to the bottom, you'll see like just this fascination with words. And also, there's another section of the website that just talks about language and language development and so on. So it's really hard, and it hurts me to admit that you're right, XC Music. The etymology does not always dictate the modern meaning. But I think it. I am not a language. I'm not of the mind of the certain philosophical persuasion according to which language use dictates meaning. Like I'm not fully bought in. I think it partially dictates meaning, but I don't think it fully dictates meaning. Yeah. So to follow up on an earlier topic we were in the middle of, agnosticism is about knowledge. Yeah, but knowledge of what? I lack knowledge. I'm withholding. So, I mean, call it what you. This actually, hey, this goes to prove your point, XE Music, and the idea that gnosos in or gnosis in Greek, gnosis does mean knowledge, and is obviously the negation of that, negation of knowledge. But knowledge of what? The no knowledge. You can probably see that means a lot of things. And think about knowledge of this, knowledge of that, knowledge of that. But an agnostic with respect to theistic belief is always going to be someone who just is in the middle, is withholding, doesn't either affirm nor deny, right? So it's that withholding position. That's where I would put the agnostic. I mean, but you can use agnostic, the term, in all sorts of different variations of meaning and so on. So, yeah, and so I guess I just said that. It's not in the middle. Yeah, must fill a blank. Yeah. So you guys agree? Yeah. So there's a like a non-standard, non-technical sense of the word agnostic. I mean, you could say, well, I'm agnostic about this philosophical view or whatnot. Yeah, that's totally fine. But in its context of using philosophy of religion, if you ever come across the word agnostic and you don't immediately think with respect to theistic belief, then I mean that's an obvious sort of usage there. Yeah. So, Michael, that's a great question. I would have to read up on this because I'm not familiar with this terminology. I must confess ignorance here. And so I've heard the terms, and I've seen them their usages. So an agnostic theist, an agnostic, maybe you guys can help me understand this. We're all helping each other learn. But if you follow that sort of spectrum, right? Atheism over here, theism over here, and then agnosticism in the middle. I suppose that an agnostic, whichever side I put theist, an agnostic theist would go over here, and an agnostic atheist would go here. It might, and correct me if I'm wrong, characterize the confidence in your agnosticism or the leanings with respect to what you desire to be true. But it's one believes, the other doesn't. So it's interesting because a theist, by definition, then wouldn't be agnostic. Unless you mean something like a fideist, right? So a fideist is somebody who thinks that you can't have reason, and so you can't know. Or, different formulation, they think that faith is all required to know. And so could there be this further position according to which you believe in God, but you don't know that God? Sure. Yeah. If you wanted to use this terminology. Like, I've never seen a good spectrum, like chart or graph that shows these. Again, because like people self-label, they self-identify as this or that. And so it's still kind of a, and this is all the rage with respect to online and interests and so on. So people are going to identify differently. I still want to get through this last part, guys. So we went through this. Right. So go through the motions just like an idiot, right? You're just believing a cult, right? Obviously. I mean, look, I could get on here and be like, Pascal's such a dumb, he's such an idiot, but I don't think that's being, genuinely charitable to what Pascal's saying. So it really grinds my gears when people are dismissive, especially like, look, people in YouTube comments are going to be dismissive, whatever. they may not be academics, but especially when academics are dismissive, or if you're trying to pose or posture or present yourself as if you are an expert on this and you're dismissive, like that's what grinds my gears. The idea that, oh, here's this brilliant individual with respect to all these fields, mathematics, physics, philosophy, and everything, and oh, he was just an idiot. Like, it's easy to say, but so I'm of the mindset that if somebody is really brilliant and has something to say, and this is an underdetermined, that's another point right here. Get to this last objection here I want to point out. So right here, so we did talk, this is Liz Jackson's paper again with respect to the 1,000 word philosophy here. Again, Liz, I know her. She's footnoted me in one of her papers, although I've not published on Pascal. Apparently gave her some sort of advice. I remember it was in Denver that we had a discussion, although we didn't always meet there. It was just for conference. In any case, but she does academic writing. She's a professor. She's got a doctorate of Notre Dame and all that, so she's legit. Even though this may not look legit or whatever, it's just public facing. That's all it is. So it's very short and succinct. So it's very helpful. So the irrationality objection she describes as this. So we've gone through the first objections, the idea, first of all, the many gods objection. We dealt with that. The idea, first of all, that you should wager for the religion you think is most likely to be true. Christianity, Islam, for example, do not have the same expected value. Wagering on the more probable religion gives you a higher chance at finding that infinite good. So their evidence sets are not identical. And one religion will be more probable than the other. The impossibility objection, this is just impossibility with respect to making yourself believe. Not only does she discuss this here, but Pascal discusses that as well. And so she's just kind of teasing out what he says and his approach. Basically, it would be to reject dogmatic voluntarism. And so this final one here, the irrationality objection, she says, even if it's possible to take the wager, that doesn't guarantee that the beliefs formed from wagering would be rational, at least from an evidential point of view. And it seems like it would violate evidentialism, the view that we should proportion our beliefs to the evidence. And this is where a lot of atheists, a lot of skeptics are going to, really point. They're going to say, look, you're being irrational because there is no evidence. There is no evidence for God. First of all, I think that's bonkers that you would say that there's no evidence for God. I'm very liberal with respect to what evidence is. Evidence is evidence. Evidence could be like, think about a courtroom, right? So anything entered into evidence could be either for either side, right? Pro or con, right? So evidence, look, Ace, you want to know what evidence for God exists? The sunrise, right? That's one piece of evidence, but also it's a piece of evidence for the atheist. I think that is my liberal interpretation of what evidence is. It is entered into the evidence pool and can be used to support either side. That's what she's saying here. And so, Michael, as you're saying that there's no good evidence, that would be a reasonable, at least, claim, right? To say there's no good evidence. Okay, you've at least said something that's reasonable right there. But to say that there's no evidence, obviously that's bonkers. I think that just like saying there's no evidence for we went to the moon. Yeah, there's evidence. Yeah. There's no evidence for flat Earth. Yeah, there's evidence for flat Earth. It's just bad evidence. So like just understand what we mean by evidence, right? So back to this. She shares this. She says, look, it would violate that we proportion our beliefs to the evidence, right? We should believe because of evidence, not because the belief is beneficial. And this obviously would be a nice objection to Pascal's wager, because Pascal's wager, again, is not an evidential argument for God's existence, like we saw with Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways and other arguments for God's existence. The wager is not an evidential argument for God's existence. It's a pragmatic argument for God's existence, or a practical or a prudential argument for God's existence. I should believe because it's beneficial to me so I don't burn in hell, not because I have evidence to. So that's what this objection says. However, the response is this. If your evidence for theism is permissive, meaning you could be rational as a theist, atheist, or agnostic, you can take Pascal's wager and still respect evidentialism. This is because more than one belief attitude fits your evidence. This is also what's considered as a proposition being underdetermined by the evidence. That's what we mean. So the idea that here's all this evidence, but it doesn't definitively point to one proposition being certainly true over another proposition being certainly true. That's all that means. So we have an evidence pool, right? So I don't look at this as many skeptics, many theists, many atheists will say, they'll say, oh, it's either this argument for God's existence, that's no evidence, or all the evidence. I wouldn't look at it as this is evidence just for this position. This is evidence. In fact, every item entered into the evidence pool would be for both propositions. Like, just consider that. It would be for both propositions. It would strengthen one and it would weaken the other. That's the way I'm looking at this, right? So here's the evidence. It strengthens this side, weakens this side, or maybe strengthens both or weakens both, right? That's the way you got to think about evidence. So the sun existing, the sun rising in the morning, well, that's evidence for God's existence. But, after all, maybe that could have just happened with the laws of physics, And so you have this battle between, how each of those views and perspectives and worldviews interprets that evidence. Those philosophical theories interpret that evidence, but it's the same evidence, right? So here you have an example of where the evidence does not determine, right? So what do I mean by determine? One versus the other, right? 1 + 1 is my evidence. 2 is one proposition, and I've got other competing propositions like 3, 4, 5, whatever, right? 1 + 1 determines that this one be true, right? Because I know it with certainty that 1 + 1 = 2, right? These other ones, it doesn't determine it at all. In fact, it doesn't really do anything in their favor. So here in empirical, especially in religious, even in political views, especially like even in courtrooms, we're not saying that this is like a special pleading a case where it's only happening in religious cases. This happens all the time. Like, just think of like murder mysteries, man. Like I read a lot of like true crime, and I've watched a lot. I've probably watched Forensic Files, like the whole catalog, probably at least 4 times, all of the episodes and all of the seasons and everything. And like, just think of like murder mysteries. Like, you don't really know who did something because we're not omniscient. We can't know. Hey, what's up, Lance? Good to see you. Yeah, thanks, man. So just think about like who killed John Benet Ramsey. There's always, especially back in the 90s, late 90s, there was a book about this, like, well, who did it? Who did it? And we still don't know, right? Because that would be an example, not even a religious example, where you have an evidence pool and it doesn't determine one proposition versus another proposition. So we're saying that with respect to the theism question, right? Because unless the atheist can declare with certitude that God not existing is as demonstrable and definitive as 1 + 1 = 2. Like, I mean, I think that would be an absurd position. Maybe some of you guys hold that, but I don't think it's that obvious, right? So I would consider it to be, by many, many pieces of evidence that you would enter in the evidence pool, I would consider that undetermined. In fact, I think probably by, if not most, maybe all. Yeah. Because this is actually the perspective not only Pascal takes, but Aquinas takes as well. Like, the evidence reason can only get you so far, and then you have to take that extra step. Okay. And of course, you're salivating in the comments thinking, well, I knew it. You got to be unreasonable. But this is not being unreasonable. She says here that, here, we'll go back to this one. No, this is this one right here. You can be rational as a theist, atheist, or agnostic, right? And another thing up here, right? What if I can't just make myself believe, right? And I got to go roundabout way, indirectly. I didn't mention this part right here, a second response. She says here, which Pascal himself favored, frames the wager in terms of action rather than believe. So you can't make yourself believe. Sure, that's fine. We can all acknowledge that and admit that. You can't make yourself believe, even if something is underdetermined right here, right? This is determinable. 1, 3, obviously false, right? So it is determinable. In other words, the idea that like it's so self-evident, possibly believe otherwise. So it is true that if I were to offer you $1 million to believe it, you probably still can't believe it. But we are dealing with this proposition that is not determinable. It isn't obviously true. And so I can't, even though I can't make myself believe it, I can commit myself to action. Right here is Pascal said, submit to God by going to church, praying, immersing yourself in a religious community rather than try to directly believe in God. And of course, that is irrational to a lot of people, but I don't think it's definitionally irrational. Yeah. All right. So we are pretty much done. That's all I really wanted to share. And I really appreciate you guys being here. Awesome engagement in the comments. I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody's comments. Yeah. So Lance, thank you for being here. You're probably gone now. Lance and I did a talk together. You can just find it in either of our channels. Lance is a friend and colleague of mine, all the different disciplines. And he's got some great stuff on metaethics. He believes in moral anti-realism. I believe in realism. So that's what that discussion is about. It's not necessarily a debate, but it's a really, really cordial discussion. We got a couple of them actually, and we'll probably discuss again. And oh, thanks, Ace. Yeah, diagnosed node is above the globe. Yeah. Maybe I'll do a reveal, an unboxing. What are those things even on YouTube anymore? Like an unboxing or whatever. Yeah. So there's a boat. That one to the right of the globe is a boat. Above to the right. To the left is I'll show you. I'll show you all three, I suppose. So those are corbels that we had mounted, and then yeah, that's great. So this is like a some kind of what world market kind of stupid thing. It's like a telescope or something nautical there, with a nautical theme also with the boat. But that flag right there is from Bretagne or Brittany in France. I spent about 3 months there and had a friend. That's an old flag. It's like almost like equivalent to state flags. It's a region in France or department. And so just planted it up there. And then this one is I don't know where I got this. This is a flask, or sorry, it's a gunpowder flask. It's not a drinking flask. And this is, I think this is antique. I don't know anything about it. If we're doing antique road shows, you guys, you can help me find the origin of this. But yeah, this is old black powder. I think it's either Italian, French, or Spanish. But yeah. Anyway, there's that. Might be some clue in the lion decal there, but yeah, it's leather. It's very heavy, and I don't think there's anything in it. But all right. Anyway, gotta go put that stuff on that. So yeah, no problem. Anytime. Maybe we'll do it. I don't even know if they do unboxings anymore, but yeah. Thanks. Like I said, I'll extend it again. Look forward to seeing you in the comments, of course, and if perhaps you. If you are ever in the Baltimore area, hit me up and extend the invitation through my email, which you can find on the homepage, home channel. It'd be nice to meet you, some of you guys in person, especially those names I keep seeing over and over. It'd be cool. Of course, you can never make it, and that's totally fine too. You'll have to just remember that's the one disadvantage is that you can't be anonymous anymore if you reach out, I suppose, and I meet you face to face. We've got to be friends, I guess, at that point. So, all right. I'll end this, guys. It's been awesome. I look to see you next time, and take care. All right. Bye-bye.